What if the people who gave you life tried to destroy it in front of the whole world? My own parents dragged me into a brutal public lawsuit to steal my multi-million-dollar company. They thought they had me cornered. Then, the judge asked one single question that ruined them forever. For as long as I can remember, love in the Harrington household came with a price tag, a strict set of terms and conditions, and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. My father, Richard Harrington, was a prominent commercial real estate developer in Bellevue, Washington. My mother, Beatrice, was a socialite whose primary occupation was maintaining the illusion that we were the Pacific Northwest's answer to the Kennedys. To the outside world, we were a portrait of affluent perfection. Behind the mahogany doors of our sprawling Mercer Island estate, we were a corporation, and my father was the ruthless CEO. In this corporation, my older brother, Simon, was the star shareholder. Simon could do no wrong. When he dropped out of his prestigious MBA program to start a crypto mining company that spectacularly failed, my father quietly absorbed the $400,000 loss and praised Simon's entrepreneurial spirit. I, on the other hand, was the liability. I was quiet, deeply introverted, and infinitely more interested in botany and chemistry than country club galas. When I graduated with a degree in biochemistry, my parents didn't attend the ceremony. My mother texted me, "Congratulations, Chloe. Let's hope you find a husband who doesn't mind the smell of dirt on your hands." At 23, I finally cut the cord. I moved into a cramped, drafty apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. I worked as a lab technician by day and spent my nights obsessed with a personal project, creating a clean, organic skincare line that actually healed severe eczema and rosacea conditions I had suffered from my whole life, which my mother had always treated as a personal failing. I poured my meager savings into sourcing high-grade calendula, sea buckthorn, and cold-pressed rosehip oil. I spent 2 years perfecting the formula in my tiny kitchen, burning through blenders and staining my countertops. I called the company Aura Botanicals. When I finally launched, it was just me, a janky Shopify website, and a ring light I bought off Craigslist. Then, a miracle happened. A prominent beauty influencer with severe contact dermatitis bought my restorative serum anonymously. 2 weeks later, she posted a completely unsponsored, tearful video showing her miraculously cleared skin. Within 48 hours, Aura Botanicals sold out of its entire 6-month inventory. I made $80,000 in a single weekend. Over the next 4 years, I worked myself to the bone. I hired a brilliant operations manager, Sarah Jenkins, moved into a proper warehouse in the Soto district, and expanded the line. By the time I turned 29, Aura Botanicals was generating $6 million in annual recurring revenue. We were being stocked in major boutique retailers across the country. I was exhausted, but for the first time in my life, I was genuinely proud of myself. I had built an empire from the dirt up, completely on my own. I had kept my family entirely in the dark. We spoke perhaps twice a year, usually brief, sterile phone calls on holidays, but success leaves a paper trail. In October, the Puget Sound Business Journal ran a cover story, "The Beauty of Bootstrapping: How 29-year-old Chloe Harrington Built a $6M Skincare Empire." 3 days after the magazine hit the stands, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Chloe, darling." Beatrice's voice dripped with a terrifying, artificial sweetness that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Your father and I just saw the article. We are incredibly hurt that you didn't include us in your little press tour. We're taking you to dinner on Friday. Canlis, 8 o'clock, don't be late." I should have said no. I should have hung up and blocked her number. But a tiny, pathetic part of me, the inner child that still desperately craved her parents' approval, thought that maybe, just maybe, they were finally proud of me. I arrived at Canlis, wearing a tailored suit, feeling like a successful CEO. But the moment I sat down at the candlelit table overlooking Lake Union, I realized I had walked into an ambush. My father didn't ask how I was. He didn't congratulate me. He took a slow sip of his Macallan and slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table. "Your mother and I have been discussing the restructuring of Aura Botanicals," Richard said, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. You've done a decent job with the groundwork, Chloe, I'll admit, but you're out of your depth now. Simon has agreed to step in as CEO to handle the scaling. We've drawn up the paperwork for a transfer of equity. We are willing to let you retain a 15% stake and the title of head of product. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of his words. Excuse me? Simon, who was sitting next to my mother, leaned forward, flashing his signature arrogant smirk. Come on, Chloe. You're a lab rat, not a business mogul. You need a real man at the helm before you tank this thing. Plus, I need a win right now. Dad's cutting off my allowance. You want me to hand over 85% of my company? I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and rising fury. A company I built from nothing? A company none of you even knew existed until 3 days ago? Beatrice sighed, delicately dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. Don't be dramatic, Chloe. It's not your company. You built it with our money. And frankly, the recipe for that serum is basically my grandmother's old salve. It's family property. Your money? I snapped. I haven't taken a dime from you since I was 18. My father tapped the leather folder. When you graduated college, I gave you a check for $10,000. That was seed capital. By any legal metric, your mother and I are the primary investors and rightful majority owners of Aura Botanicals. Sign the papers, Chloe. Keep this in the family. If you make this difficult, I promise you I will crush you. I looked at the three of them. The people who were supposed to protect me were looking at me like I was a piece of meat on a butcher's block. The lingering hope of my childhood evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I stood up, pushing the leather folder back across the table. It knocked over my father's scotch, spilling amber liquid across the white tablecloth. I'll see you in hell, Richard, I said softly. Then, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I thought I had won that battle. I didn't realize they were about to declare thermonuclear war. Less than 48 hours after the disastrous dinner at Canlis, the retaliation began. I was at the Aura Botanicals warehouse, laughing with Sarah as we finalized the packaging for our new holiday line. The massive bay doors were open, letting in the crisp autumn air. A black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the loading dock. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out, holding a thick manila envelope. He bypassed my warehouse staff, his eyes locked onto me. Chloe Harrington? He asked. Yes? He shoved the envelope into my chest. You've been served. I ripped open the envelope. The heavy legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the header was unmistakable. Richard and Beatrice Harrington v. Aura Botanicals LLC and Chloe Harrington. They weren't just suing me for ownership. They were suing me for breach of fiduciary duty, intellectual property theft, and elder financial abuse. They had hired Belinda Pendleton from Pendleton and Associates, a notoriously vicious corporate litigator in Seattle known for bleeding his opponents dry through endless, suffocating motions until they surrendered. What is it? Sarah asked, seeing all the color drain from my face. My parents, I choked out. They're trying to take the company. The lawsuit claimed that the $10,000 graduation gift was explicitly given as a venture capital investment, and they had a promissory note to prove it. It also claimed that the foundational formula for my best-selling eczema serum was stolen from a proprietary family recipe that Beatrice had entrusted to me for safekeeping. It was utterly insane. It was entirely fabricated. But in the legal system, the truth doesn't matter as much as who has the most money to burn. And my father had a war chest of millions. The real nightmare, however, started the next morning. I woke up to a frantic phone call from Sarah. Chloe, check the bank accounts. Now. I scrambled to my laptop and logged into our Chase business portal. Available balance. $0. Account frozen. My heart stopped. We had just placed a $400,000 order with our primary manufacturer in Oregon. The invoice was due in 2 days. If we missed that payment, the manufacturer would halt production. We would miss the holiday season, and Aura Botanicals would be bankrupted before the end of the year. I called my hastily hired attorney, Beryl Ross, a competent but mild-mannered lawyer who was already out of his depth against Pendleton's firm. How did they freeze my accounts, Beryl? I screamed into the phone, pacing my living room. Pendleton filed an emergency ex parte injunction late yesterday, Beryl explained, his voice grim. They submitted an affidavit to a sympathetic judge claiming you were attempting to liquidate the company's assets and wire the funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands to avoid paying your investors. The judge froze the accounts pending a preliminary hearing. I don't even have a passport. How could I go to the Cayman Islands? I cried. Beryl, we have a massive vendor payment due on Friday. If I can't access those funds, I lose my supply chain. I lose my business. I'm filing a motion to vacate the freeze, but the earliest we can get in front of Judge Harrison is next Tuesday. Chloe, you need to prepare yourself. Pendleton is playing dirty. Playing dirty was an understatement. Belinda Pendleton wasn't just trying to win a legal battle. He was orchestrating a public execution. By Wednesday, my parents had leaked the lawsuit to the press. My phone exploded with Google alerts. A prominent local gossip blog and a regional business site simultaneously published articles detailing the lawsuit. The headlines were devastating. Local beauty queen sued by parents for stealing family fortune. Aura Botanicals founder accused of elder abuse in shocking multi-million-dollar lawsuit. They painted me as a manipulative, sociopathic daughter who had exploited her sweet, aging parents' generosity, stolen their heirloom recipes, and was now trying to flee the country with the profits. My brother Simon even gave an exclusive quote to a reporter. "It breaks our hearts. We gave Chloe everything to help her start this little project, and the moment it made a dime, she completely cut our parents out of her life. They're devastated." The fallout was instantaneous. Two of our biggest retail partners suspended our upcoming wholesale orders, citing the controversy. Our customer service inbox was flooded with angry emails from loyal buyers, calling me a fraud and demanding refunds. My Instagram comments were a war zone of vicious attacks. I sat on the floor of my warehouse office, surrounded by boxes of inventory I couldn't pay for, reading the hateful comments. I was losing everything. The empire I had built with my own hands, my own tears, and my own sleepless nights was being ripped away by the very people who had made my childhood a living hell. My father's threat at Canlis echoed in my head. "I promise you I will crush you." On Thursday night, the night before the vendor payment was due, my lawyer Beryl called me. He sounded exhausted. "Chloe, Belinda Pendleton just called. They're offering a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" I asked numbly. "If you sign over 75% of the equity and step down as CEO immediately, they will unfreeze the accounts tomorrow morning so you can pay your vendor. They'll also drop the elder abuse claims to salvage your personal reputation. You can stay on as a minority shareholder." My father had perfectly engineered the trap. He choked off my air supply, and now he was offering me a straw to breathe through, as long as I gave him the oxygen tank. If I don't sign? If we go to the hearing on Tuesday and the judge upholds the injunction, you'll default on your manufacturing contracts. The company will be insolvent within a month. Chloe. They have a forged promissory note. They have affidavits. Pendleton is a monster in the courtroom. It might be time to cut your losses. I looked out the window of my office into the dark warehouse. I thought about the thousands of women who used my serum. I thought about Sarah, who had quit her corporate job to believe in me. I thought about the little girl who used to hide in her room, nursing her cracked, bleeding skin while her mother called her ugly. I wiped my face. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me. "No," I said. "Chloe, be reasonable." I said no, Beryl. I am not giving them my company. We go to court on Tuesday, and if we go down, I'm making sure they bleed with me. I didn't know it then, but the document they had forged to destroy me was about to become the exact weapon that would obliterate their lives. Friday morning arrived with the subtlety of a heart attack. At 9 a.m., the $400,000 vendor invoice hit my inbox. At 9:01 a.m., my business accounts remained completely frozen by Judge Harrison's order. I had exactly 7 hours before the West Coast wire deadline closed. If the money didn't clear, our Oregon manufacturer would pivot their assembly lines to a competitor's holiday stock. Aura Botanicals would be dead in the water. I couldn't let my parents win by default. I refused to be starved out of my own castle. I left the warehouse and drove straight to a high-risk, hard-money lender in downtown Seattle. These were the kind of predatory lenders who smiled at you while calculating the exact liquidation value of your life. I put up the title to my paid-off Subaru, liquidated my meager personal 401, taking the massive early withdrawal penalty, and finally handed over the one thing of value I owned. A flawless 2-carat diamond tennis bracelet my late grandmother had left me the only Harrington who had ever actually loved me. By 2:45 p.m., a high-interest personal wire of $400,000 was initiated directly to the manufacturer. The supply chain was secure, but I was now personally broke, deeply in debt, and standing on the edge of a cliff. That weekend, my lawyer Beryl and I turned my tiny Capitol Hill apartment into a war room. Every surface was covered in legal briefs, financial statements, and the discovery documents Belinda Pendleton's firm had confidently dumped on us. Pendleton's strategy was clear: overwhelm us with paperwork so we couldn't find the glaring lies hidden within it. The centerpiece of their entire lawsuit was Exhibit A, the promissory note. It was a standard, slightly crumpled piece of legal paper. It explicitly stated that the $10,000 check provided by Richard and Beatrice Harrington was a seed investment, granting them an 85% equity stake in any and all future commercial skincare, cosmetic, or botanical ventures initiated by Chloe Harrington. At the bottom was my signature. "I don't understand, Chloe," Beryl said, rubbing his temples, a half-empty cup of cold coffee in his hand. "This is your signature. The handwriting experts will confirm it. You said you never signed anything." I stared at the blue ink on the page. My stomach churned. It was my signature. The unique loop of the C, the sharp angle of the H trim, it was unmistakably mine. "I didn't sign this, Beryl, I swear to you." The only thing I got from them at graduation was a generic Hallmark card and the check. They handed it to me in the driveway. I pulled the document closer, squinting at the details. Look at the date, the 14th of June, 2017. And look here, at the bottom. It's notarized. A notary stamp from a man named Thomas Sterling. "A registered notary in King County," Beryl sighed. "That makes the document legally ironclad in the eyes of the court. A sworn officer of the state witnessed you sign this." "But I didn't," I shouted, the frustration boiling over. I closed my eyes, trying to transport myself back to the summer of 2017. I was 22. I had just graduated. I was trying to get as far away from my parents as possible. My eyes snapped open. The blood roared in my ears. "Beryl," I whispered, my hands suddenly shaking. "The 14th of June, 2017. "Yes?" "I wasn't in Washington State on the 14th of June, 2017. Beryl froze. "What?" I scrambled across the room to my filing cabinet, ripping open the bottom drawer. I dug through old tax returns and leases until my fingers brushed against a small, navy blue booklet. My old passport. I flipped through the pages frantically until I found the faded ink stamps. I slammed the passport down on the coffee table, right next to the promissory note. "I did a post-graduation backpacking trip," I said, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across my face. "I flew out of SeaTac on June 10th. Look at the customs stamp, London Heathrow, entry, the 11th of June 2017. I didn't return to the United States until July 28th. Beryl stared at the passport, then at the supposedly notarized document. The color drained from his face as the reality of what he was looking at set in. "They didn't just forge a contract," Beryl said softly, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and rising adrenaline. "They committed criminal fraud, and this notary, Thomas Sterling." I pulled out my laptop and rapidly typed the name into LinkedIn. Within seconds, a profile popped up. Thomas Sterling. Title, Senior Escrow Officer at Harrington Commercial Real Estate. "He's my father's employee," I said. My father had taken an old signature of mine, likely from a medical release or a college lease guarantor form, superimposed it onto a fabricated contract, and forced his own employee to illegally notarize it to make it look legitimate. "We have them," Beryl breathed. "Chloe, we have them." "Not yet," I replied, my voice turning to ice. They also claimed the formula was my mother's heirloom recipe. They're going to use that to claim intellectual property theft to steal the company anyway. I need to bury that lie too. I walked over to a heavy cardboard box I hadn't unpacked since college. I sliced the tape open and pulled out a stack of thick, spiral-bound notebooks. They were my advanced organic chemistry lab journals from my senior year at the University of Washington. I flipped to an entry dated October 2016. There, in my cramped handwriting, was the original, highly technical breakdown of the Aura Botanicals restorative serum. It was covered in red ink from my professor, grading my molecular extraction methods for cold-pressed rosehip. I looked at Beryl. Call Pendleton's office. Tell them we refuse the settlement. We'll see them in court on Tuesday. Tuesday morning in King County Courthouse felt like walking to the gallows, despite the ammunition we carried. Judge Eleanor Harrison was a notoriously strict, no-nonsense magistrate who did not tolerate theatrics in her courtroom. As I took my seat next to Beryl at the defense table, I felt the heavy, suffocating gaze of my family burning into the back of my neck. I risked a glance over my shoulder. My father, Richard, looked completely relaxed, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. My mother, Beatrice, was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, already playing the part of the heartbroken matriarch. Simon sat behind them, smirking at me as if I were a bug about to be crushed. Belinda Pendleton stood up to make his opening arguments. He was a master of the stage. He didn't just speak, he performed. "Your Honor," Pendleton began, his voice echoing with righteous indignation. "This is a tragic case of a daughter's profound greed and a heartbreaking betrayal of familial trust. Richard and Beatrice Harrington gave their daughter everything. They funded her education. And when she came to them with a dream of starting a skincare business, they gave her their hard-earned savings and the very recipe passed down from Beatrice's own grandmother. In return, Chloe Harrington took their money, built a $6 million empire, and legally locked her elderly parents out of the very company they own." He paced in front of the judge's bench. "We are asking the court to uphold the freeze on Miss Harrington's accounts, as she is an active flight risk, and to grant immediate receivership of Aura Botanicals to its rightful majority owners, her parents." Judge Harrison peered over her glasses at Beryl. "Mr. Ross, I assume you have a rebuttal to these rather severe allegations?" Beryl stood up. He was nervous, but the truth makes a man brave. "Your Honor, we will prove today that not only does Chloe Harrington own 100% of Aura Botanicals, but that the plaintiffs have engaged in a malicious, coordinated conspiracy to defraud my client and steal a company they had zero part in creating." The courtroom fell dead silent. Even my father's confident posture stiffened slightly. Pendleton immediately called my mother to the stand. Beatrice Harrington was a master manipulator. Under Pendleton's gentle questioning, she spun a magnificent web of lies. She cried exactly when she needed to. She spoke of how she used to mix the healing salve in her kitchen for me as a child, how she entrusted me with the secret family recipe because she believed in my passion. "It breaks my heart," Beatrice sobbed softly, looking at the judge. "I don't care about the money, Your Honor. I just want my daughter back. But she has become so corrupted by this sudden wealth. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. If I hadn't lived the nightmare of my childhood, I would have believed her myself." "Your witness, Mr. Ross," Pendleton said smugly, sitting down. Beryl approached the podium. He didn't look angry, he looked clinical. "Mrs. Harrington," Beryl began, "this heirloom recipe you claim to have invented. It is the exact formula for the Aura Botanicals restorative serum, correct?" "Yes," Beatrice sniffled. "It's my great-grandmother's." Beryl nodded. He walked back to our table and picked up my heavy chemistry notebook, dropping it onto the podium with a loud thud. "Mrs. Harrington, I hold in my hand my client's Advanced Organic Chemistry Lab Journal from the University of Washington, dated 3 years before the company was founded. On page 42, there is a detailed chemical breakdown of the serum in question. Could you please tell the court the exact molecular weight of the hyaluronic acid used in your great-grandmother's recipe?" Pendleton jumped up. "Objection!" Irrelevant and badgering the witness. "Overruled," Judge Harrison said sharply, her eyes narrowing at my mother. "I'd like to hear the answer. If she invented the formula, she should know its contents. Beatrice faltered. The sweet, victimized facade cracked for a split second. I don't know the scientific terms. I just mix the herbs. I see, Beryl said. Do you mix the herbs using a proprietary liposomal encapsulation process? Because that is the foundational mechanism of the serum. A process my client invented and patented, which is thoroughly documented and graded by Professor Belinda Higgins in this very notebook. Beatrice looked desperately at Pendleton, her face flushing red. Chloe must have complicated it to confuse us. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor, Beryl said, leaving the notebook entered into evidence. Pendleton was visibly agitated. His star witness had just been completely discredited regarding the intellectual property. He needed to pivot back to his strongest weapon, the contract. The plaintiffs call Chloe Harrington to the stand, Pendleton barked. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the witness box. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and locked eyes with my father. He gave me a microscopic, chilling smile. Pendleton approached me like a shark circling a bleeding fish. Miss Harrington, he sneered, your lawyer put on a cute science fair presentation just now, but let's talk about the money. Did your parents hand you a check for $10,000 upon your graduation? Yes, it was a gift. A gift? Pendleton laughed mockingly. A $10,000 gift, with absolutely no strings attached, from a renowned commercial real estate developer? My client is a businessman, Miss Harrington. He doesn't give handouts. He makes investments. Pendleton walked over to his table and picked up the heavily protected plastic sleeve containing the promissory note. He marched up to the witness stand and shoved it in my face. I remind you that you are under oath, Miss Harrington. Is this your signature at the bottom of this legally binding notarized contract granting your parents 85% equity in your business? I looked at the document. I looked at Pendleton's triumphant face. And then I looked up at Judge Harrison. It is my signature, I said clearly. A collective gasp echoed in the gallery. Pendleton smiled broadly, turning to the judge. Your Honor, the defendant just admitted to. But, I interrupted, my voice cutting through the courtroom like a whip, I have never seen this piece of paper in my life, and I certainly did not sign it on the 14th of June 2017. Pendleton scoffed. So now you're claiming magic, Miss Harrington? Your signature just magically appeared on a notarized document? No, I replied calmly. I'm claiming forgery, and I'm claiming perjury. Judge Harrison leaned forward, her demeanor shifting from passive observer to highly alert. Those are very serious accusations, Miss Harrington. You just testified that it is your signature. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I looked over at Beryl, who was already holding up my old passport. It is my signature, but it was impossible for me to sign it in front of that notary on that specific date. Pendleton frowned, a flicker of uncertainty finally crossing his arrogant face. Objection. Where is this going? Let her finish, Mr. Pendleton, Judge Harrison commanded. She turned back to me. Explain yourself, Miss Harrington. I took a deep breath, ready to drop the bomb that would end my parents' reign of terror forever. Explain yourself, Miss Harrington, Judge Harrison commanded, her voice dropping an octave, echoing off the mahogany walls of the courtroom. I looked directly at Belinda Pendleton, who was still holding the plastic sheath contract like a trophy. Then I turned to the judge. Your Honor, the date on that notarized signature is the 14th of June 2017. As my attorney is about to enter into evidence, I was not in the United States on that date. Beryl stood up smoothly, picking up the navy blue booklet from our table. Defense Exhibit D, Your Honor. A certified original United States passport belonging to Chloe Harrington. I have already provided copies to the bailiff. If you look at page 12, you will see a British Customs entry stamp dated the 11th of June 2017 at London Heathrow Airport. On page 13, a United States re-entry stamp dated the 28th of July 2017 at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Beryl paused, letting the silence in the room stretch until it was almost deafening. My client, Beryl continued, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, was 4,000 miles away when she supposedly walked into a Bellevue office to sign away her life's work. Pendleton's face went completely slack. For the first time in his legendary, ruthless career, the great PAF2 Belinda Pendleton was speechless. He stared at the copy of the passport the bailiff handed him, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. In the gallery behind me, I heard a sharp, panicked intake of breath. It was my mother. "Mr. Pendleton," Judge Harrison said, her tone dangerously quiet, "is there a clerical error regarding the date on your primary piece of evidence?" "Your Honor, perhaps the notary made a mistake on the dateline," Pendleton stammered, frantically trying to salvage his case. "A simple administrative oversight does not invalidate the underlying signature." "It is not a mistake, Your Honor," Beryl interrupted, stepping out from behind the podium. "Because we also took the liberty of looking into the notary who stamped that document, a man named Thomas Sterling." Beryl pulled a thick stack of employment records from his briefcase. "Thomas Sterling is not an independent third-party notary. He is the senior escrow officer and payroll manager at Harrington Commercial Real Estate. He has been employed by the plaintiff, Richard Harrington, for 15 years. The color drained entirely from my father's face. The smug, untouchable armor he had worn his entire life shattered in an instant. Simon, sitting behind him, suddenly looked terrified. "We assert," Beryl said, "that Richard Harrington took a signature from a 2015 college apartment lease guarantor form, digitally superimposed it onto a fabricated, backdated contract, and coerced his own employee to illegally apply a state notary stamp to steal a $6 million company from his daughter." Judge Eleanor Harrison slowly took off her reading glasses. She placed them on her desk. She didn't look at Pendleton. She didn't look at Beryl. She fixed her gaze dead onto my father. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Harrison said softly, "stand up." My father hesitated. His hands gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard his knuckles turned white. Slowly, shakily, the great CEO stood up. And then, the judge asked the one question that changed everything. The question that permanently dismantled my family's empire. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Harrison began, her eyes burning with judicial fury, "are you aware that suborning perjury, falsifying a sworn affidavit, and knowingly submitting a forged instrument to this court constitutes a Class B felony in the state of Washington, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of up to 10 years in state prison?" Richard Harrington opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The man who had terrorized me, belittled me, and tried to ruin my life in front of the entire world was trembling like a leaf. "Your Honor," Pendleton practically shouted, physically stepping away from my father as if Richard were suddenly contagious. "I need an immediate recess. I need to confer with my client. I had absolutely no prior knowledge." "You don't have a client anymore, Mr. Pendleton," Judge Harrison snapped, her gavel hitting the sounding block with a crack like a gunshot. "You have a crime scene, and I suggest you retain your own counsel, because the State Bar Association is going to dissect your firm's discovery process with a scalpel." She turned her attention back to the courtroom. "This lawsuit is dismissed with extreme prejudice," Judge Harrison declared. "The emergency injunction freezing the accounts of Aura Botanicals is vacated immediately. Mr. Ross, you will file a motion for summary judgment regarding legal fees and punitive sanctions against the plaintiffs, which I will gladly approve. Furthermore," she looked at the bailiff, "contact the King County District Attorney's Office. Tell them I am referring Richard Harrington, Beatrice Harrington, and Thomas Sterling for immediate criminal investigation regarding conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery." It was over. I slumped back in my chair, the adrenaline leaving my body in a massive, dizzying wave. I looked over at my family. My mother was sobbing hysterically, but this time there were no cameras, no reporters to manipulate. They were real tears of terror. Simon was frantically texting on his phone, likely trying to figure out how to distance himself from the wreckage. And my father? He just stared blankly ahead, a ruined man. I didn't say a word to them as I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't need to. The aftermath was a media bloodbath, but this time the guns were pointed in the right direction. The same gossip blogs and business journals that had dragged my name through the mud published massive retractions. The headline, "Prominent Developer Faces 10 Years for Forging Documents to Steal Daughter's Company," ran on the front page of the Seattle Times. Thomas Sterling, terrified of prison time, flipped on my father immediately. He handed over the original digital files, proving Richard had engineered the forgery. My father was indicted on 3 felony counts. To avoid a lengthy prison sentence, he pleaded guilty, paying millions in fines and restitution. Harrington Commercial Real Estate lost its primary investors overnight and was forced to liquidate its assets. My mother was ousted from every charity board and country club in the Pacific Northwest, her reputation as a sweet socialite permanently incinerated. Simon's allowance dried up entirely, forcing him to finally get a real, entry-level job at 31 years old. As for me, the public revelation of what I had survived became the greatest marketing campaign I could have never planned. Women rallied behind Aura Botanicals, the narrative of a self-made woman fighting off a corrupt, predatory family resonated globally. Our sales quadrupled in the fourth quarter. Within 2 years of the trial, we crossed $20 million in annual revenue. I never spoke to Richard, Beatrice, or Simon again. They were entirely excised from my life. I had walked into that courtroom terrified that I was going to lose the only thing I had ever built. I walked out realizing that for the first time in my life, I was finally, truly free. They had tried to bankrupt me in public, but in the end, they were the ones who paid the ultimate price.